Okay, we're going live. We're going live on Facebook. And gentlemen, thank you. It's Saturday. It's Scotland. It's 1 p.m. And it is a Force for Good's Saturday street stall. Broadcasting to you live here from our nerve centre in the great British city of Glasgow. With me, your host, Alistair McConaughey. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Robert. All coming in. Great guys, and happy to have you on the team. I'm going to give you a little bit of a wave there. Hope you get a wave back. Thank you for everybody coming in also now on Twitter. And we're broadcasting on Twitter here and on Facebook here. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is the result is in of A Force for Good versus the Evening Times. The International Press Standards Organisation has adjudicated upon that. The Independent Press Standards Organisation, the IPSO, has adjudicated upon that. It's been a 2-month thing. We appealed, and I'll tell you all about that shortly. But the results are in. Thank you for everybody who's coming in, watching. We're going to get to the result of A Force for Good versus the Evening Times when they made a crazy headline claiming 80,000 people had marched in Glasgow on the 11th of January, when we all knew that was just complete bogus. We took it up with the IPSO and they have given us their considered opinion. We're going to get to that shortly. Thanks for everybody coming in. Angus, John, Sandra, thank you for coming in. Just saying, we're going to speak about the AFFG versus Evening Times case at the IPSO. The Independent Press Standards Organisation finally ruled upon that. But before we get there, yesterday was Victory in Europe Day. Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. And we were so glad for and so grateful for all the people who posted on our Facebook page the pictures of themselves or their houses or their gardens wearing or decorated with Union Jacks. That was lovely to see, especially everybody up here in Scotland who did that. Thank you very much. Our thread on that matter reached tens of thousands of people and it got over 1,200 likes and a lot of shares. And so we were keeping up with one of our regular aims, which is to turn Scotland red, white and blue, to raise the visibility of British symbolism in Scotland. And that's one of the things that we do on a regular basis. And we encourage everybody to do that on a regular basis. Because as we say, the Scottish National Party aim to put British symbolism out of sight and out of mind if they can get away with it, if they can do it. And they've been having various successes in that regard. Thank you for everybody coming in and watching on Facebook and also live on Twitter. This is A Force for Good. I am Alistair McConaughey and we're broadcasting. This is the 6th time we have broadcasted live, the 6th weekend during this period of lockdown. Now, when I spoke about Victory in Europe Day yesterday, I emphasised the in because some people don't even understand what that's about. And unfortunately, one of these people is one of the MSPs here in Glasgow for the Scottish Cabbage Party, the Soggy Greens. And he tweeted out last night, I'm not going to grace him with his name. He knows who he is. He's hanging his head in shame right now. But he tweeted this out, right? This is one of our Scottish Cabbage Party, the Soggy Green MSPs. He says, this victory over Europe stuff is really uncomfortable. It was a victory in Europe. Is this over Europe language being used anywhere but the UK? Do you know what, mate? It's not being used anywhere It's not even being used in the UK. It's only being used in what passes for your cerebral cortex. It's only a nerve flitting between your cerebral cortex that makes you come up with such absolute nonsense. It's not victory over Europe. If you've been going through life thinking it was victory over Europe, you're sadly deluded. It's victory in Europe. Victory in Europe, mate. That's what it's all about. The day the Germans surrendered in Europe. The war, of course, as we know, continued in the Far East until September. So these are the people who are making our laws, okay? These members of the Scottish Cabbage Party, complete turnips, who don't even know what VE Day stands for. This is what we're up against, folks. These people have the wisdom of a Mung Bean, okay? The wisdom of a Mung Bean. And Mung Beans are actually, they actually do more for society than a member of the Scottish Cabbage Party. And because at least you can eat a mung bean, okay? And a mung bean does have a higher IQ than a member of the Scottish Cabbage Party. So, I just wanted to get that off my chest there, quite frankly, that we have people who are making our laws who don't understand basic British history. It's very, very sad. Sandra there saying cabbages, turnips, good description. Totally. I'm trying to get the mung bean thing trending as well, if we can. The Scottish cabbages are mung beans. Message coming in there. Somebody... Okay. So, thank you very much for coming in. VE Day. There was a really good picture that appeared on the front page of the Times, by the way. I don't know if you saw it. They have the front wrap around of a Scots Guards piper standing on the white cliffs of Dover as two Spitfires flew over, and it was also carried in the National there. I don't know if you can see it, really good. The one that was in the Times had the whole white cliffs in the background as well. It's just a fantastic British picture, and makes you proud to be British, as they say. Also, of course, the Queen's broadcast last night, which was really, really good. You know, the Queen is getting a lot of credit these days, quite rightly, because she's hitting just the right note. And whenever we see her, we're just so grateful that we still have a monarchy in this country. And of course, as many of you know, things like the monarchy and royalism and so on are very much part of Unionist culture. You know, Unionist politics is all about solidarity and sharing resources and all these sorts of fine things. Unionist culture is very much flags, monarchy, armed forces, remembrance, things like that all form the Unionist culture, as well as our politics, which is about sharing our resources together. Brian saying, so many uneducated people who seem to not care much. Well, that is the thing, Brian, and we do have a Scottish education system up here, which it could be improved, shall we say, certainly as far as understanding British history is concerned. One of the things that we do at A Force for Good is every day we have a this day in British history. And I don't know why schools don't just adopt that. You know, if all you did was you went into the history class that day and you learned a couple of things that happened this day in British, chuck in the world there if you want world history as well. I mean, and you did that every year, people would know their history. Absolutely, and they know all about Britain. But what they do now in history is, you know, they look into how, if you were like a woman in the 14th century, how you would feel about it, you know, which isn't really, you know, you can think about these things once you become an adult, but when you're a child, you just want to know what happened on that date, what happened in that month, what happened in that century, and why were these guys fighting each other. You know, these are the basic things which help to help to centre you in life. And then once you're an adult, if you want to look into how women in the 14th century felt about things, or whatever, then you can do that when you're an adult. But as a child, that's just too much beyond you, and it's not interesting anyway. So, yeah, the Queen's broadcast, and I printed it out here. And it was a really good mix of history. And I see Eddie there has put up the Instagram picture on our Facebook thread of the Scots Guards soldier playing the pipes on the White Cliffs of Dover. So check that one out. That's good. Scott saying schools can't teach, SNP wouldn't let them. True enough. And Richard's saying, sadly, the quality of the MSPs is generally very low. All they add is ignorance and another expensive tier to Westminster. Well, there will be a lot of people who will be giving you the thumbs up to that particular message, Richard. Now, the Queen was saying, and this is important, just what she says here. As I now reflect on my father's words and the joyous celebrations which some of us experienced firsthand, and that was a wee note to those of us who knew that she was also out on the streets experiencing that firsthand. She goes, I am thankful for the strength and courage that the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and all our allies displayed. So that's nice to see the Queen talking about the United Kingdom. She's not going, oh, wasn't it great that we won the World War II with a four nations approach, That's what they'll probably say today. But the Queen's still old school, saying the United Kingdom. That's fantastic. And then she goes on to say, an end. And when I look at our country today, our country, not our four countries or our four nations or our family of nations, no, our country, wonderful, and see what we are willing to do to protect and support one another, I say with pride that we are still a nation. We are still a nation. Those brave soldiers, sailors and airmen would recognise and admire. Amen to that. Amen to that. We are still a country and we are still a nation. And it was lovely to see the Queen suggest that. And of course, the hardcore Scottish nationalists hate that language. They hate that language because they don't want to accept that the United Kingdom is a country and it is a nation. But as we've been saying since we began, that's the crux of the difference between us and them. We see the United Kingdom as one nation. We understand it's made up of several nations. It's a multinational nation. We understand that, but we also see it as one nation. Just found you. What a breath of fresh air coming out of Scotland. According to BBC, you're all SNP supporters. My faith now strengthened in you guys. Thank you, Gary. That's a wonderful comment, and we do appreciate you saying that, because it is certainly the case. If you were in England and all you saw when you switched on the television was the Scottish National Party or Ian Blackford, or people just rotting off and basically trying to make you feel bad about being English, I mean, you would get really, really upset with that. I mean, we get upset with that up here in Scotland. You know, how people in the rest of the UK think when they see the Scottish National Party rotting off on television. It must drive you up the wall. So I'm so glad that you found us at A Force for Good. We've been going since March 2012. We're totally ignored, of course, by the BBC and Scottish television. But we're not going away, because slow and steady wins the race. We're not a flash in the pan. You know, we're not suddenly here today, gone tomorrow. We were here 8 years ago, and we're going to continue to be here. And forever, basically, you know. This is our mission in life, and we are surrounded by wonderful people who help us on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram and on YouTube and out on the streets, and who stand with us and who stand to protect us all. And we say thank you so much. We're building a team here. We're building the AFFG family, as I know some of you talk about. And we're going to just continue to get bigger and stronger. And so that's that's our message to you, Gary. Thank you for dropping in. Please stick with us, and please share this so that other people in the rest of the UK can know that there is a unionist voice. There is a great British voice up here, which is non-party political and which doesn't support any particular party, just wants to keep the United Kingdom together and wants to keep Britain great. Richard saying, Devo launched that talk of four nations in the political realm. Yes, it did. It did. Prior to Devo in 1999, we tended to think of ourselves simply as one nation with the four parts all pulling together. But then what happened with devolution is it set four parts going off in the different directions. And now, of course, when you have a Tory government in England, well, Tory seem to be in England, but in fact is the British government, the Scottish nationalists will try to make it look like it's an English government. And then, of course, the Welsh Assembly, who runs the Welsh Assembly these days, is it Labour? I'm not sure. They then, of course, will attack it all as well. So everybody's going in different directions. So devolution really compromises the ability to pull together, even at times like this, which is tragic when we think about it. I don't see any good about that. If you think there's something good in that, please tell us. Angus is saying, can you address the SNP Scottish nationalist attitude and approach towards VE Day? Their view of Britain always being the bad guy spills out into almost denial of our contribution and sacrifice in the Second World War. Well, I think the SNP have to be careful about this, obviously, because they know that it is a sacred thing for most people here in Scotland still today. But some of their supporters, their hardcore supporters, don't want anything to do with even remembrance, actually, because they see remembrance, even the act of remembrance, even the act of Remembrance Sunday, as something that the Unionists do. That's tragic when you think about it. They see the poppy as, oh, that's like a Unionist symbol, you know, all that sort of stuff. It never used to be the case, but now the hardcore Scottish nationalists have gone that way. Nicola Sturgeon, of course, being a political operator, isn't so blatant about those sorts of dislikes, so she has to try to pay lip service, if nothing else, to the principle of those things, in the hope that she might get some British and Unionist people on her side. But it's a difficult area for her, because it's one that she obviously kind of would rather stay out of, because it's very much a British united day, a day when the advantages of sticking together came out strongly, you know, because we won the war. George saying stay safe. Absolutely, thank you. Rob Jones, it's still Labour in the Welsh Assembly. I refuse to call it the Welsh Government, as we the people didn't vote for that. We voted for an assembly. That's true, Rob. And it voted really by the skin of your teeth. It was a very, very small percentage that delivered devolution. It was almost split 50-50, actually, if I recall correctly. And but then what happened was more and more powers were given by all the parties to the Welsh Assembly, to the point where even the Tory government, who claims to be Conservative and Unionist, have devolved a lot of competencies to the Welsh Assembly. And I noticed recently, just last week, they passed a law. These are the Tories that did this, by the way, to say that it's now called the Welsh Parliament, not the Welsh Assembly. So sometimes you wonder about the central British government and the extent to which it really has people who want to keep the UK together, or to what extent it just has people who have fallen into this whole devolutionary movement. We shall see, but what we can do anyway as people is to continue to stand for the Union, to continue to make the case, to say, I don't want Wales to break away from the rest of the United Kingdom. I don't want Scotland to break away. I don't want Northern Ireland to break away. I'm British. I like being British, and I love the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom benefits us all. And just to drown out their voices of separatism with one of unity. Richard saying they want to rewrite history and wipe out 400 years or more of fellowship as fellow Britons. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what they would do if they could do it. But as we say, we are one nation, and we've been coming together through the centuries as one nation, to the point where today we have one head of state. We have one central parliament. We have one political system, which is representative parliamentary democracy. We have one international boundary, which is recognised worldwide. We have one British citizenship. We have one language. We have one currency. We have one passport. We have one British anthem. We have one British flag. We have one British armed forces. We have one British presence on international institutions throughout the world, whether the UN or the WTO or the what have you. We're recognised internationally as one nation. So, just as the Queen said yesterday, we are still a nation. Those brave soldiers, sailors and airmen would recognise and admire. So the SNP and its supporters, of course, want to pretend that we're not a nation. And they do that in order that they can delegitimise the object of our loyalty, which is our great kingdom of United Britain, as we like to phrase it. John's saying, very much in favour of the United Kingdom. You are doing a great job, but you must sell the United Kingdom. Well, absolutely, absolutely. That's what we try to do, and we do that to the best of our ability. It could be a lot better, no doubt. Every day on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, regular videos on YouTube, and of course our website, aforceforgood.uk. Talking of which, please sign up to our email, because at this particular time, when there's maybe not a lot of money floating around, if you can at least be in contact with us, and you go to aforceforgood.uk/support, and there you'll see a box where you just put in your name, put in your email. That will be automatically added to our fortnightly email update, where we will keep you in touch with everything that we're doing. Graham is saying, one nation, spot on. We hear too much in the media about four nations. All plays into the separatist hands. Of course it does. Of course it does. And this four-nation approach, to what extent is it going to be even able to continue after tomorrow? To what extent will we see Nicola Sturgeon making play of whatever Boris comes up with? To what extent will we see her trying to be different for the sake of being different? And it's so easy in these circumstances to be different for the sake of being different, because all you have to say is, we're being different because we want to save lives. And if you go down your route, you'll end up killing people. And they just need to bring out or even imply that dramatism. And it's the easiest thing in the world for them to justify being different in these circumstances. So in many ways, this is a gift for the SNP. And while we believe that in the long run it won't do them good, it is giving her and the people in the Welsh Assembly a platform to try to appear to be different. And they're milking that for all it's worth. Believe me, they are milking that platform. Sandra's saying, our worst enemy is apathy. Nats are highly motivated to ruin our country. We need to be just as motivated, and then some. And Karen's saying how right you are, Sandra, and that is so true, because they are motivated. My goodness me, we were looking at a report which appeared in the National, because as we always say, we read the National so that you don't have to. And it appeared on Wednesday, May the 6th, and it was talking about something called the Scottish Independence Foundation. Now, that's a grand title. Foundations usually have to we know from a fact that you only get to use the word foundation if you're handling hundreds of thousands of pounds. Okay, so that gives you a clue straight away that they got that passed by the Charity Commission, that name. So they're handling hundreds of thousands of pounds. And they were set up in June 2018, and according to this article in The National, blah, 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 this is just one of the many hubs and offices supported with Scottish Independence Foundation awarding grants worth £165,000 to 130 projects in total. So £165,000 has gone to 130 separatist projects since June 2018, since 23 months ago. That's serious coin that they are generating. And as Sandra says, they're generating that because they are totally motivated to get this from their grassroots supporters. We've got nothing like that in unionism. We do our best, obviously, here, but it's nothing like that. It doesn't even come to a fraction of that. So these people are organised to mess up our country. And therefore, that's why we're building a force for good. We need you to sign up at aforceforgood.uk/support. Be in contact with us, share our work, share our Facebook, share our Instagrams, share our Twitters, share our podcasts. We rip the audio from this. We have somebody who does that, a very talented audio editor who does this, rips the audio, puts it onto Spreaker, Spotify, Podchaser and Deezer. Go onto those platforms, search for A Force for Good podcast, and you'll find us. And you can also go to aforceforgood.uk/podcast, and you'll hear our podcasts. We put it up every week. So, thank you for that, Richard. Again, Four Nation talk is pure ignorance. It's fine for friendly rivalry and sport. The United Kingdom is one, first and second. Correct. Bill, where's the extra money we keep being given by Westminster? Can the accounts of the SNP Scottish Government be audited? Good question. I don't know the answer to that. We have to presume the money's somewhere, but I don't know, Bill. I don't know the answer to that question. John is asking a very good question there. He says, do you want the new proposed blasphemy law? What are the ramifications to Scotland, the UK and free speech? Well, we're going to speak about that. We're going to write a big article about that because I've got a degree in Scots law and I've studied this field for many years. I wouldn't actually call it a blasphemy law. I know that's what's being suggested. To cut a long story short, Humza Yousaf's bill, and he is basically he's abolishing the law of blasphemy, actually, which hasn't been used in Scotland anyway for 178 years. So he's writing that off the statute book, and he is producing it with a new, you could call it a blasphemy law, but the blasphemy here is heresy against his politically correct state. Okay, so that's the new blasphemy. In a day and age of secularism, we're not actually talking about blaspheming God, we're talking about blaspheming the orthodoxies of the politically correct state. That's what this new so-called blasphemy law, to give it a nickname, is about. Blaspheming the orthodoxies of the politically correct state. And we'll probably use that as a title for our article, which we'll write within the next fortnight. A lot to be put together, but essentially hate crime is ridiculous anyway, because it's trying to make a crime of an emotion. Okay, not an action. And it's also against free speech. It's perfectly correct that if you were to advocate arson, you should be charged with that because you are advocating to a crime, and that's wrong. And so you don't have that freedom of speech. But if you simply say something that is not a crime, you're not advocating that anybody gets hurt. You're just thinking that, you know, I don't like you because of whatever. That should not even be on the statute books. That's not even a crime. You cannot make emotion a crime. However, we've gone a lot. That argument was lost. I mean, people like myself were making that argument 20 years ago. that argument now has been accepted, that emotion is a crime when it should not be in the first place. So we're going to take it back to first principles and show you why it's all wrong from the very start, and why it also confounds basic Scots law principles. One of them being the law of intention. Normally you would have to be convicted of a crime, you have to show intent, and you have to prove intent. Under hate crime laws, you don't even have to have had the intention. We'll get into that, but to answer your question, John, it's a very, very bad law, and it shouldn't be anywhere near the statute book, but in our politically correct world, we've got it. Richard, probably getting you. Good stuff. Okay, where are we? Yes, I'm going now to speak about A Force for Good versus the Evening Times. Now, what is this about? Well, as many of you will know, back in the 11th of January, A Force for Good was out with our Thin Red Line on a really rainy, windy day on Union Street in Glasgow. And we witnessed and we watched the Scottish nationalists wombling by. We witnessed their separation slouch. We witnessed the divisive dawdlers winding and wobbling their weary way down Union Street. Too much public disdain, it might be added. And we were flying the flags, we were flying up the red, white and blue. We were reminding the world that Britain exists and Unionists exist. And we also filmed them, and we spent several hours, 2 of us, 3 of us, counting. And we came up with a number of 10,156 of them, which is an impressive number, it should be said. However, the Scottish nationalists are perpetually unable to tell the truth, and so they came up with their joke figure of 80,000, which they had already made up the night before. And to their shame, the Scottish media just accepted that, even though they knew we were the go-to people to come to for the figure that we can document with video evidence. They just went with the 80,000 because it's a lot easier than having to talk to those pesky Unionists. Because if you talk to them, then you've got to listen to them, and then you might be convinced by them. So they just prefer to pretend that the Unionist side doesn't exist. We spoke about that last week. So obviously that was getting annoying. So we're opening up papers, 80,000, 80,000. We had told all the media of the figure, 10,156, that night. And we sent out tweets and Instagram posts and Facebook posts, and we really circulated that figure. And we had the video as well up on our website, aforceforgood.uk, which you can see if you go to January 2020. Anyway, on the 13th, the march was on the 11th. On the 13th, we picked up the Evening Times, and it said here, huge march for IndyRef 2 vote. Row over referendum rolls on as politicians join 80,000 on march. Okay, as politicians join 80,000 on march. So they were holding that out. That headline was being held out as if this was what happened. This was the figure, 80,000. And we thought, well, you know, that's not right. That's a misleading headline. And there is soft law against that. That you shouldn't be able to do that. And it's monitored largely by the Independent Press Standards Organisation, who actually have an editor's code wherein it says the press must take care not to publish inaccurate, misleading or distorted information or images, including headlines not supported by the text. Now, we were aware that if you read the text, there was a little bit that said that this was the estimation by the organiser of the march. But you had to read the small text to find that out. And the 80,000 figure was not in inverted commas. There was no suggestion that this was somebody's estimation. It was just blandly put out there in the heading, 80,000 on march. So we looked at the IPSO website and they said, try to get this figured out first with the editor. You know, see if you can resolve it with him. So we wrote to the editor of the Evening Times, the Glasgow Evening Times, who also, it should be said, happens to be the editor of the national newspaper as well, the Scottish Nationalist supporting paper. Anyway, that aside, we waited for a response for 1 month, but answer came there none. So we thought, you know what, we're not in a rush about this, we'll write to him again. And so we sent him another letter on the 15th of February, and by the 15th of March there still had been no response. So we then approached the IPSO with our formal complaint. And we contended that, look, we're involved. A Force for Good is involved in this. We attend these marches, we film them, we count them. We have a stake in this matter, and we are now known as the go-to people for these figures. There was plenty of time for the Evening Times to have found our figure, because it was hugely put out on social media. The Evening Times has a duty to provide balance, but there was no alternative explanation in the article about, oh, we spoke to Alistair McConaughey of AFFG, who said there was in fact 10,156 and he could prove this with video evidence. There was none of that. And there was no evidence whatsoever other than the quote from the organiser of the march, who has got form in seriously exaggerating his numbers. And so we said this headline is in breach of paragraph 1, that the press should not include headlines which are not supported by the text. And we received a response on the 3rd of April, and they said this, I'll quote it: "You said that the article breached clause 1 because it reported that 80,000 people were in attendance at the march when your organisation had only counted 10,156. We noted that the article did not state as a fact, but instead said that this was an estimate." The headline stated it as a fact, okay? "On this basis, there was no possible breach of clause 1. You are entitled to request that the executive decision to reject your complaint be reviewed." So on that basis, we did request a review, and we said the headline is not supported by the text. We are aware that the small print of the article does state that this is an estimation from the organiser. However, the headline clearly states 80,000 as a fact, because it does not put it in inverted commas. And we ended saying, if you had put it in inverted commas, then that would have suggested it was someone else's debatable estimation. And the headline and text would therefore have been in accord, and we would not have complained. If they had put 80,000 in inverted commas, that would have made people look at it, stop, and say, what's that then? Is that, who's saying that? You know, but no, the headline was not in inverted commas. So we got a response back this week on the 5th of May. Disappointing. "The committee noted your concerns. However, in this case, it considered that the headline claim was clarified by the text, and the basis of the 80,000 figure was therefore evident to readers." Well, okay, that's the end of that matter. However, we do have some things to say in this. That, firstly, please be aware, the IPSO is not endorsing the 80,000 figure. It's not taking a position on the accuracy of the matter. Its concern is only whether the newspaper has clarified the basis of the figure. And those are the two words, clarification and basis. And it does believe that that figure has been clarified, that there is a basis for that figure in the text. Well, that's very unfortunate, because it does seem that we are to conclude that it is acceptable in the eyes of the IPSO for a newspaper to plaster any old figure up there and hold it out boldly as the truth to the casual reader, to the casual browser who's going through Twitter, oh, 80,000, oh, that's 80,000, that's amazing. Oh. It seems appropriate to do that, to hold it out, even if it is a wild estimation, and you have to go to the small print to find out the fact that it is just an estimation. So it's a serious political concern for us, since the initial damage is done with the headline, because the headline is what most people these days are just looking at, especially on social media. March says 80,000 on a Facebook post or a Twitter post. People go, 80,000, right, wow, and then they scroll through it. They don't click on it to go in to read the article. Okay, so if these figures are being put out there in social media posts without inverted commas around these figures, people are just going to accept it as the truth, and they're not going to take time to clarify the figure or to find out what the basis of the figure is by reading the small print. So we have to be aware of that. So what can we do? Well, what we at A Force for Good can do when these marches start up again, is we will be filming them, and we will be counting them, and again we will be getting the exact numbers, and we are going to make sure that we have a system in place whereby we immediately make a complaint to the IPSO, to the point where they become sickened of our complaints, and we're to the point where all the editors and all the journalists in the Scottish media know that if you let that fly, you're going to get involved in an issue with the IPSO. That's the only thing that we can do. We might still get the same old answers, but we have to do it anyway. And we have to hope that somewhere down the line, the Scottish media and the journalists are going to grow a backbone, and they're going to be able to say to Ian Blackford next time he's on the Joe Coburn show, Daily Politics Live, mouthing off about 80,000, she should be able to say to him, okay, Ian, what proof do you have for that? And then watch him stutter and stumble, because he has got no proof. And we use that example because he did say that on the Joe Coburn show, 80,000, and Joe let it fly, did not challenge him. And obviously all the viewers as well, 99% of the viewers, the people who are not aware of our work, will think that that's a true figure as well. You know, journalists have to knock this on the head, because if there was ever a second referendum and we go into this with these inflated figures, hugely inflating what we're up against, then that will have a massively demoralising effect upon unionism. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about that, other than the fact that what I've just said there is going to be released at 2:05 on our website, aforceforgood.uk, where you can read the whole thing there. And please share that link on Twitter and on Facebook and wherever you can, because we have to get the truth out. This is a long-term fight. Slow and steady wins the race. And we are slow and we're steady, and we are making things happen. We are making things happen. Bill says they will just put massive numbers with inverted commas and hope the lazy or non-curious don't read it. That's also a possibility, and there's always going to be that danger. Ray's saying, I'm convinced that even now a significant number of the Scottish population are unaware of the extent of the deception and distortion of the truth that the SNP and their followers resort to. I absolutely convinced that you're correct there, Ray. John Mumford, John saying, it was the same with the Stop Brexit marches in London. The media believed hundreds of thousands. Absolutely. You know, they were saying these figures are just crazy. Once you start talking about 100,000 on any march, you have got to show how you came up with that. Because, I mean, these are massive numbers, which really very unlikely that these figures would ever happen. And things like million stuff, that's just fantasy stuff. When you say 1 million on a march, that's just total fantasy. Total fantasy. You know, London's, if there was 1 million on any march in London, the public system would just collapse. You know, the underground would collapse. The buses would collapse. It's just not feasible. Anyway, Richard saying, people in other parts of the UK think the Scots are revolting. I know what you mean, revolting. In a way, they're not when they hear 80,000. Aye. So, thanks. If any questions or comments, please send them in. We love to hear from you, and we really do support all the people who keep us going, just morally as well. As I say, if you can, go to forceforgood.uk/support and get your name and your email, and you'll be kept in regular contact with what we are up to. Michelle saying the SNP brainwash people there. Yeah, they do. They do. However, when people are exposed to what we're saying, they see the other side of the argument. So it's important for us to be able to keep going, and we can do that with your support. Tell us your supporters at forceforgood.uk/support. Now, what I want to do just now is look briefly, before we wind down, to look briefly at what's coming up this week in British history, because we love our British history, because the history informs the present, which creates the future. And nobody else is teaching British history in Scottish schools, so we can teach it daily on our social media platforms. And well, yesterday was Victory in Europe Day. It wasn't victory over Europe, Mr. Scottish Cabbage Party, Mr. Soggy Green that we were speaking about at the beginning of this broadcast, who thought it was all about Britain's victory over Europe. I mean, how confused do you have to be about World War II history to think Britain was fighting all of Europe? It's frightening, really. Anyway, he's an MSP, he's making laws for us, and no doubt he'll be supporting the hate law that the chat was talking about there earlier. Anyway, coming up today, 9th, is Liberation Day in the Crown Dependencies, which are, well, the Crown Dependencies are Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man, but today, Guernsey and Jersey are commemorating the 75th anniversary, because a day later, the Germans surrendered in the Channel Islands. That's today. Tomorrow is the 10th, which is the date when the Scotsman who taught Nelson his naval tactics, which won the Battle of Trafalgar, died. His name was John Clarke of Eldon, and he wrote a book on naval tactics, an essay on naval tactics, and Nelson consumed that book and used the tactics that John Clarke had written about to win the Battle of Trafalgar. So that's a little Scottish angle there in that great British victory. On the 12th is the day that Florence Nightingale was born in Florence, in Italy, hence her Christian name Florence. And it's also regarded as International Nurses' Day, the day that the iconic British heroine Florence Nightingale was born. And she established the first training schools for nurses, as well as helping the men who were fighting in the Crimean War at the time. And she passed away peacefully in her sleep in last century, in 1910, aged 90. And for some reason declined the offer of burial in Westminster Abbey. On the 14th, another person in British history who was a nurse in the Crimea as well died. Mary Seacole died on the 14th of May 1881, and she's a fascinating character because her father was Scottish and her mother was Jamaican. Her father was a Scottish officer in the British Army and her mother was a Jamaican, and she set up what she called a British hotel behind the lines of Balaclava, which was a kind of comfortable quarters for sick and convalescent officers. And some historians dispute the extent to which she could be called a nurse, but she certainly did provide nursing facilities to an extent, and she does have a very big statue outside St Thomas's Hospital on the banks of the Thames next to Westminster Bridge, which you should check out. We checked it out a couple of years ago. Very impressive, massive statue actually. And what we are always interested about Mary Seacole is that she was very politically incorrect, you know, which was maybe a result of just her she obviously had to be quite strong-willed, a woman like that, in those days. But I mean, she was really politically incorrect. She didn't like you. She liked the British, but she did not like all the other races, and she had lots of things to say about lots of races, which today would be considered very politically incorrect. And she loved the British Empire and Britain's imperial ambitions. And a good article was written about that on a website called conservativewoman.co.uk. Search for Mary Seacole, Seacole. And you know, the left, what you call them, the woke, the politically correct, will always talk about bringing down statues to racist white men. Well, what about this woman? She's a black woman. Okay, check out what she was saying about different races. Okay, she was definitely what you might call a woman of her time. So that's an interesting little quirk there about Mary Seacole, which we find quite interesting. And she was a great British patriot, and she was a friend of Wellington and also Edward VII. And then on the 14th, William Alexander Smith, the Scotsman who created the Boys Brigade, the British Boys Brigade, he passed away in London in 1914. So a lot going on in the world of British history, which we'll elaborate upon on our Facebook page. May's saying SNP supporters don't question what is said by organisers or the First Minister, they just accept it as gospel. That's true. There is a certain cultishness there. John's saying, could you tell the British public who and what? Not sure what there. Somebody's saying, what do you think about a prominent Scottish nationalist being removed from Twitter? Well, we don't like to see anybody being removed from social media platforms unless they've broken the law in the sense of advocating a crime. And it sets a bad precedent. And that person was not removed for anything he said about Scottish nationalism, but for a politically incorrect opinion. So we don't like to see anybody being removed, and we're aware that Twitter does that. I mean, the Twitter police are very politically incorrect. Politically correct, very politically correct, hugely. And we don't want to see them removing politically incorrect accounts. So we were concerned about that. And it's always good to have people that you disagree with, because it helps to keep one's own self on the ball to know is that right or wrong, or how does one respond to that. So generally speaking, we're very much free speech advocates. When we see the marches that we're on, when we see the Scottish nationalists with the Tory Scum out banners or the sweary banners or whatever, we think that's shameful, but we don't think it should be banned. We don't think it should be banned, but it is shameful, and it does show them up. It does show them up as crass and ignorant and shameless, but we don't want that banned. We don't want that banned because we do believe in free speech. And if they want to, we often say about the Tory Scum Out banner people, they're the most honest men on that march, because they're thinking what all the other people on that march are thinking, but they've got the guts to stand up and say it, ignorant though it is. So they're the most honest men on that march. And we wrote about this. Go to aforceforgood.uk/blog and go to February 2020, and we wrote a big article, the definitive article on the Tory Scum Out banner, which is always a huge amusement, really, at the end of the day. It's ignorant and foolish and nasty, but hey, what's what's new as far as that's concerned, as far as the those sorts of mentalities can be concerned. So check us out on a podcast /podcast. We're on Spotify, on Deezer, on Podchaser, on Spreaker. We are on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. We have a great social media team, and I want to thank them so much for all the work that we're doing. And I hope that everybody is keeping safe at the moment. And in that regard, I want to just finish with a very perceptive article which appeared in the Daily Telegraph back on the 22nd of April. And this person was talking about the danger of this stay home, save lives slogan. And he was comparing it to the World War II slogan, keep calm and carry on. And he made a point which really hit home, that the World War II slogan was, yeah, keep calm, be cool, but keep carrying on, even though there's bombs dropping out the sky. Even though you could get blown to smithereens, carry on. Whereas what he said about this slogan, and this man is the chairman of Risk and Security in International Relations at the University of Bath, Bill Durodie. And he said, as a slogan, stay home, save lives, encourages what at the time of the Second World War would have been recognised to be a paralysing deep shelter mentality. It fails to engage people actively in the collective effort to restore normality. Not just keep calm, but also carry on. And he made a historical parallel, which I hadn't known about, but apparently Ramsgate in the on the Kent coast was bombed, and 120 homes were destroyed, but only 29 civilians lost their lives. And this was because huge numbers of people from Ramsgate had sheltered in underground tunnels, which had been turned into a bomb shelter, basically. But then what then happened is that the people of Ramsgate didn't want to come out of these tunnels, and that by 1941, the Home Office and Ministry of Home Security came to view this shelter as a problem. Unlike expectations elsewhere in the country, which emphasised supporting the war effort by facing up to life as normal, the ability of hundreds in Ramsgate to hide away permanently from the reality above them in crowded, unsanitary conditions led to morale which was described as almost non-existent. Fearing they would depress the spirit of the surrounding population, the authorities evicted them from the bomb shelter. Which interesting way of doing things, and you can see the parallels with today. And so I thought that was just interesting. We don't know, we don't take a position on this one way or the other. Of course, it's all above and beyond our ken, those sorts of matters. But I thought that was a very interesting point. This chap is concluding that we need to rapidly regain our sense of purpose and venture out again soon to shape the world according to our intended trajectories. We must remind ourselves that we do not just live our lives, we lead our lives. Fantastic comment. That sometimes, you know, you can find stuff in the newspapers that's just like, whoa, ooh, mind-blowing stuff. Okay, folks, thank you for watching. We're going to bring this to a close now, and thank you so much, guys, on Twitter and everybody on Facebook. Please share this if you can, and if you can retweet, please, on Twitter. And the podcast will be up probably Monday evening, if not tomorrow night. And go to aforceforgood.uk/blog, and in 2 or 3 minutes our big article about AFFG versus the Evening Times will be published. And thank you to all the team that's been behind the Twitter, and the team behind Facebook, and the people who have been coming in with questions, and Stephen saying the great British spirit will always win through. Absolutely, it will win through, and that's a fantastic way to conclude. Ladies and gentlemen, God bless the United Kingdom, and see you next week at 1 o'clock. God save the Queen.